Alright, what is going on, everyone? I'd like to thank you all for listening to the 6th episode of the LD podcast, and this is without a doubt going to be my biggest and probably most popular podcast. It is the 6th episode, and it is featuring Jacob Stitch Duran, and most of you will know him as the former cutman for the UFC before he lost his job about a year ago now. After speaking out about the Reebok deal, I got in touch with him about a week ago now. I just said, look, big fan of yours, love to have you on the podcast, and he actually agreed. He was a really nice guy. I'm really grateful to have had him on. I expressed this to him after the podcast anyway, so I'm not going to babble on about it. But yeah, it was a really interesting conversation. He talks about all the beef he had with Dana White. He tells us some stories about some fighters and things that went on in the back room before fights, and it's a really interesting podcast. I definitely suggest listening to it all. Yeah, I'm not going to keep talking, so we're going to get straight into it. Just before we get started, the first 3 or 4 minutes of the podcast, you can hear Stitch's voice, but it's a little bit muffled, and that's just because I was using 2 different types of recording software to record the call, and the kind of better quality one, for whatever reason, the first 3 or 4 minutes didn't record properly, so I kind of had a backup one there. That's why I used 2. So just know that it's only the first 3 minutes that his voice is muffled, because I know it's hard to listen to an interview when the other person talking you can't really hear. So yeah, just make it through the first 3 minutes, and yeah, the mic quality gets better. Don't forget to like this video, please, and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Alright, let's get straight into it. So I'm gonna get started now. Alright, so everyone, this is Leon here with the LD podcast, and I'm here with a very special guest. It's Jacob Stitch Duran. A lot of you will know him as the cutman for the UFC before he lost his job. Well, about a year ago now, Stitch, was it?
That's pretty much. I think we're kind of turning that bend right now, and it's been a fast year though. So yeah, good things have been happening since that moment, Leon.
Yeah, good to hear. And just before we get started now, could you just explain to everyone what a cutman is? Because I know what it is, but there may be some people listening that don't.
No, absolutely. The cutman's duties basically is to really give that fighter every opportunity to win a fight. But once the fighters get into the dressing room, one of our first jobs are to wrap the fighter's hands. And in wrapping the fighter's hands is the main theory to that is that they don't break their hands. So you got to protect their hands because those are the primary weapons. But come the fight, then the fighter gets cut or he gets swollen. Then our job is to walk in there and minimize the bleeding and control the swelling and like I say, give that fighter every opportunity to win the round. So we're the Mick of the Rocky movies. We are the Mick of the mixed martial arts boxing.
Yeah, no, that's a pretty good way of looking at it. Yeah, you're the Mickey. Because doing that job for the UFC, and especially for so long, 2001 you started with them, was it?
Yeah, well, it was, UFC number 33. I think the UFC started in 32. They had a show in Atlantic City, and then when they did their first show here in Las Vegas, and, Dana White brought me in, and at that time it was only Leon Tabbs, and Leon Tabbs was actually the original cutman from UFC number 1. So when Dana and Lorenzo and Frank bought the UFC, Leon Tabbs came on board, and it became an unfair advantage for him to work on both corners. So Dana, being the smart man that he was, brought me in to be the other cutman in the other corner, and from there that whole system has grown worldwide, where just about every mixed martial arts organization is doing the stuff that me, Burt Watson is the one I'm talking about, and Leon Tabbs. We created this program that everybody's using right now.
Oh, jeez, didn't know that, yeah?
Yeah, a lot of people don't know, but we're going to talk, Leon.
Yeah, well, that's why I'd like to have you on, because, I mean, the UFC obviously being such a world-renowned organisation, everyone knows about it, but I feel like the jobs of the cutman and the cornerman, they don't really get a whole lot of recognition, I suppose, not a lot of people know about them.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's one of my goals is to educate the fans. And, having guys like you call me and ask me these kind of questions is really going to help. But, the UFC, when they brought me on board as the second cut man, was really Dana's first or one of his many great accomplishments of looking out for the health and safety of the fighters, because the mixed martial arts is such a new sport that a lot of the trainers, even now, don't know how to wrap hands or much less work cuts. So guys like Leon Tabbs, myself, Don House, Rob Monroe, we all come from a boxing background. Even, the guys in the UK and Ireland, these guys come from a boxing background. So we have the instruments and the knowledge and the experience to take care of these fighters. But, come fight time, as a matter of fact, I was just reading an article yesterday where Joe Rogan was saying that, I guess because of the Fox TV shows, that they paint over the blood in between the rounds. And actually, I've seen that done. But that they have instructed him not to talk about blood. Well, blood is like it's like a big part of the mixed martial arts. And if you notice through all the commentaries, they very soundly do they mention the great work of the cut man. They'll mention the beautiful Ariane or the beautiful Britney Spears, but very few times do they mention the work of the cut man. But, if you were a fighter, Leon, who would you prefer to have in the arena, a good cut man or a ring girl? And I think the majority of the fighters would go with a good cut man.
Yeah. And that's, I think, why that came as a massive surprise to a lot of UFC fans to hear that you got the sack. Because, I mean, as I said, not a lot of people know what the job of the cut man is, but a lot of people knew who Stitch was. They knew of you. Even if they may not have known what you'd done, they knew of you, that way. So to hear when Stitch got sacked, and especially because of talking about the Reebok deal and the reason it happened, it was such a surprise, that way.
Yeah, that was it. Kind of blew everybody's mind, actually, including myself. But it was it was during that period when the fans and the fighters and the trainers and the media were all bitching and moaning about the Reebok deal. Number one, it didn't make sense to the fighters. I was talking to Johnny Hendricks a couple of weeks ago. We were in Dallas doing some autograph signings, and he said, he was making like $250,000 a year. Now I think he gets 15, 20,000 a show, every time he fights. So there was a big disparity there, but the uniforms, fans were complaining, fighters were complaining that the uniforms looked terrible, and so I guess a guy from one of these websites decided to do a story on the cut man, and I thought I was pretty politically correct. In fact, I knew I was. He basically said that it's the UFC has taken our sponsors away, which I depended on heavily, and they want us to wear Reebok, and they're not going to compensate us for that, And during that whole year, because they gave us like a year warning, during that year, I tried to meet with the staff and about getting an increase at least in pay, some kind of compensation, and every time we were turned down. So I was honest in my answers. And, when it went out, it went viral because it just added fuel to the fire that was already existing. And I guess it had so much drama that the next day they called me and quote unquote is UFC's not going to use you anymore because of the article you did with Reebok. And, once I let one of the fans that got a hold of me, the first fan that got a hold of me on Twitter, I let him know. I said, I just want you to be the first one to know that the UFC got rid of me for speaking up about the Reebok deal. But once again, and even now, I just did my first Bellator show in Connecticut over the weekend, and the fans everywhere, they're stopping me on the streets and the restaurants, where airports, they all acknowledge that I had big balls, to do what I did. But I did it for my sake, and, it became quite a big thing. And now Conor McGregor, one of your guys, is basically doing it the same way. I kind of started the rebellion, and and now you get Conor that is complaining about UFC 200, obviously, and I have to applaud him for that because it's gotten to the point now where the UFC. When I first started with them, Leon, Dana and them would say that as we grow, everybody grows. Well, they grew, we never did, right?
Yeah.
And now, the same percentage of the pie is given to is being the payout is the same. So they're making so much more money, and they're not splitting that money with the participants, which are the fighters. And you can't have a show unless you have fighters, and that's whether it's in boxing or whether it's in the mixed martial arts or whether it's in football or whether it's in any sport. Well, unless you have the participation of the athlete, you can't make money. And for Conor McGregor to come up and speak his piece that way, I have a whole new amount of respect for him because I don't think he realizes, or he might realize that he just revolutionized or continued the rebellion of fair treatment to the athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just going to say there, Benson Henderson obviously went over to Bellator,
Right.
and I don't know if it was the entire reason, but I know that a partial reason of it was because of the amount of money he was losing out due to the Reebok sponsorship. Do you think that we're going to see a lot more fighters now moving to the likes of Bellator and other organisations to fight there because they allow the sponsorships?
Yeah, I think so. I think the bottom line is, as long as, I'm reading what these guys got on pay scale. I think there was like 11 or 12 guys that got $2,500, and that's embarrassing. It's an insult actually to these athletes, to get that amount of money for sponsorships when the UFC, they created the sponsorship opportunity from day one, not only for the fighters, but for the cutmen. They gave us the opportunity to have sponsors, and they charge these sponsors. They were taxing them anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 a year
Jeez.
to have us wear their logos, right?
Yeah.
So it was a business that the UFC had created, and then all of a sudden they pulled the carpet underneath our feet, and they want to do it their way, and their way just, once you build an avenue, you can't block it off and say, well, we're going to do it this way, but that's what they did. And so your point to that is, will more people look at different options? Absolutely. They're going to look at a lot more options. And the bottom line is, in this game or any game, is to fight, not get hurt, and make some money that will, be able to take you throughout your life. And that's really the bottom line to what we do. It's a job.
Yep. Well, I'm going to go back to the fighters now in a second, but I was just wondering there, you said that you took a big hit with the Reebok sponsorship. Were you obliged also to wear Reebok ringside? Was that the case?
Yeah, they had told us through our, because the guy that was accountable to us, that the executive that we would report to, had all the cutmen, and he took us out to breakfast, and number one, the first thing he goes and he says, and he's the guy that's supposed to keep an eye on us or take care of us and be the representative for us to the UFC, right? First thing that comes out of his mouth is, I just want you guys to know that my only accountability or my thing is to take care of Dana, Lorenzo, Frank, and Zuffa. And that kind of puts us like, shit, what are we supposed to do, Yeah. So he put us in that position, but he told us that we couldn't use any more sponsors and that we were going to have to wear the Reebok and not get compensated, And so, with that, me being the senior cut man, and there was probably eight, 9 of us at that time, 10 of us maybe, I was always the one that would represent everybody. And when these companies would come to me for sponsors, I would negotiate my fee with them, but then I would also try to get the other cutmen additional sponsorships, and I would negotiate something for them. So, that became somewhat of an issue. And like I said, they created that, and then they took it away and wanted us to still perform at the same optimum level that we were doing before, where it was really becoming it was a job. It is a job, and so, yeah, I kind of spoke out about that.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I don't think many people disagree. Like for a lot of fans of the UFC that they may not be as dedicated or may not be as kind of hardcore fans as what some people are. When they see the Reebok deal, they just look at it as another clothing sponsorship, But I think for anyone who really knows anything about the sponsorship, they agree that it's bullshit, and I'm sure you're one of those that agree. Like, I didn't know that the cutmen would have been affected the same way that the fighters were.
Sure, no, absolutely. They took everything away from us, and as a matter of fact, it got, it got so crazy after that the UFC let me go. I mean, it just started a big firestorm with the fans and the media, and I had so many fighters that called me, so many of the UFC employees that called me behind the scenes, nobody really wanted to step forward, right, except for the fans, and they really made a big thing. But in 2 weeks, after I got let go, I did like 57 interviews from all over the world. I literally had camera crews coming to my house, and it became a big issue. I even had the guy from Reebok that called me and tried to smooth things out with me and kind of play me for a sucker. And, the things that these guys, they didn't realize that I worked at the corporate level for 23 years, so I understand the business aspect of it. And he's trying to tell me that they had nothing to do with it. Well, Stitch, we have nothing to do with it. We just give them the money, we supply the hardware. But I'm not stupid. If I was to give Leon $70 million, I would need to know how every penny is going to be spent, right?
Of course,
That's corporate business. That's just business number one. And then he really had the balls to say, well, you know what, Stitch, we were going to have our phase two, we were going to include the cutmen. Well, once again, brother, if you were going to have a phase two, wouldn't it have been appropriate if you would have mentioned that when you mentioned phase one? Yeah. And they would have eliminated all these problems. But it was, he was trying to make Reebok look good, but the fans, even till now, are boycotting it. And I don't even know if that guy's still working with them. If I would have been the corporate guy, I would have fired him for doing a bad job.
Yeah. And can I just ask, I don't know if you'll know the answer to this or not, but I frequently listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, and he's always promoting fighters to try and expand on getting their own brand out there, that way, like making their own brand of t-shirt that they can wear, in their own social media videos, and maybe create some revenue down that avenue. Would that have been an option for you, or?
Well, it's, no, it wouldn't have, the option that they created, sponsors were paying money because their product was on TV, plain and simple, right? But, if I was corporate America, or if I was one of the guys in the top echelons of the UFC or even Reebok, I would have said, you know what, let's keep these other sponsors because they look pretty damn good on the uniforms, number one. Let's make these guys some money so they could be happy with the organization, and we'll still have our UFC logos and we'll still have our Reebok logos. We'll get primary position, but let's give the secondary and tertiary, third positions to these other sponsors so everybody could be happy, right? Yeah. That's what I would have done. And but that wasn't the case, and greed always, that's what ruins a lot of good companies, brother.
Yeah, and you can almost see it going down that road with the greed already, can't you? In that, like, it's so clearly a money stunt, that way. There's no other motive to doing this. I mean, nobody, literally no fighters, maybe the likes of the Conor McGregors and the Ronda Rouseys, who are being paid like millions for each fight. But when you look at the entire UFC roster of every fighter, 99.9% of them are losing out. And the only person that are really making any gains from this are the UFC. So I definitely agree in that it's just a money stunt, that way.
Yeah, because, when, let's say, they paid $2 million for the company, they had invested $40 million on it, and they were going to pull out until the Spike Reality, the Tough Show came out, and then they started making money. But, that losing money ended years and years and years ago. Now everything that they're doing is 100% profit, and it's major bucks. And you're right, you got the Conor McGregors, the Ronda Rouseys, that have been the chosen ones as representatives of the company, that have been making a lot of money. But what is the old saying? You don't put all your eggs in one basket. Well, that's what they did here, because you had Conor that lost, you had Ronda that lost, and it just kind of it put a bad taste in people's mouths. But now you have Conor McGregor that is saying, you know what, I'm not going to fight. But I understand his point, because he's brought so much money into the system that, like I say, that pie isn't split up fairly, and it's about time that these guys look at it and say, you know what, we should take care of these fighters a lot better. And Leon, I come from a boxing background, so the eras of the Don King, and everybody kind of knew the reputation of Don King, right? That he would take money from fighters and what have you not. Well, we're kind of looking at the same scenario.
Yeah. Well, I definitely agree. I was actually only thinking there the other day about this whole sponsorship and just about the entire situation. And if I'm honest, in 5 or 10 years' time, unless the UFC can really open their eyes and see the path that they're going down, I don't even see the UFC being a competitor, if you know what I mean. Like, already now you have people like Benson Henderson and Matt Mitrione. They're two big names in the UFC who have gone over to Bellator. Now, there are only two so far. So why isn't it? Like, why wouldn't smaller, as you said, with Johnny Hendricks? Like, I'm sure at some stage through Johnny Hendricks' career in the past year or so, he has sat down and thought, is there another option other than the UFC? Because I'm sure if he went over to Bellator, he'd pick up every sponsor he had before this whole Reebok deal came back in, and surely he'd make more money, even just off of sponsors, no?
Yeah, and that's an excellent point. And at the end of the day, at the end of the year, I should say, you look and then you add all the money that came in, whether it came through sponsors, whether it came in through appearances, whether it came in through actually fighting, however it came in, you add all that money up, and at the end of the year, you're making good money. Let's say you go through Bellator, you're making a lot more money that way than if you were to stay with the UFC and get paid a little bit more for the fight, but nothing else. Yeah. And the bottom line is making money and taking care of your family. And yeah, are you going to see that? And, I just did my first show with Bellator. And, when I had met with Scott Coker, he was very, very fair on giving me what I wanted. And, he said, Stitch, I understand you work boxing, and I understand boxing pays a lot more than what we do. So if you have a boxing show that same day as a Bellator show, I have no problems in you taking that boxing show. But if there's a date available that is not for boxing, please give us the Bellator date. And, and if you want to go and do Invicta, which I do, and I've done the World Series of Fighting, those dates are available and they're not a Bellator date, man, by all means, go do it. And that's the way it should be. We're independent contractors, and my job is, when I first did the first World Series of Fighting, Ray Seffel had called me and asked me if I could bring in cutmen to do like we do in the UFC, right? So I'm thinking, yeah, no problem. It's another payday for us, and we're there to take care of the fighters. And before that, Don House and myself had every UFC show. I mean, we did every show, bar none. We never missed one. And the next thing you know, the next 5 shows, we're not working. And these are shows in London and in Tokyo and, just all over. And I checked with the main office, and, the quote they gave me is that they're giving the B team, quote unquote, international experience because we're starting to grow. So I accepted that. But then we weren't getting jobs, and I met with that same guy that we're accountable to, the attorney, and he says, well, you gave these guys, the WSOF, you gave these guys credibility. And I kind of look at him, and then he says, well, let me put it to you in legal terms. You're an independent contractor, and we hire you on a fight-by-fight basis. So he kind of put that strap on me, right? And I said, hey, you motherfucker, so, but that's the kind of, that's the kind of stuff I was working with behind the scenes. And, they had you under that terror watch, and they still have the fighters under those conditions. And that's why you don't see as many of the fighters coming out. And I think now that Conor McGregor has made that move, I don't think, and I hope he realizes it, but I think that him doing that is affecting not only himself in a positive way, but it's going to affect other fighters that are down the tube, in the same position as him. So bless his heart on that for speaking up. You had to have somebody of prominent name and position to do what he did, and there was nobody better in the game and better timing than what Conor McGregor did right now in preparation for UFC 200. It was, it's going to change the outcome of the game. And I'll tell you this, pulling Conor McGregor out of UFC 200 was done on a business aspect because he says we're friends and all that. Nah, you know what? He's not friends with the guy. This is business, right? Yeah. And but him pulling him off is they're going to lose money for this show. But I know Dana pulled him off because like they did to me. They try to stop my voice, so they got rid of me. But they picked on the wrong guy. Well, the same thing with Conor McGregor. They figure let's pull him off of this card right now because he's getting too big for his britches. But I think it's going to bite him in the ass down the road.
Yeah, well, I actually only recorded a podcast there about a week ago discussing the entire UFC 200 situation, and one of the one of the ideas I came up with was that with this whole Conor McGregor, coming out and saying basically, look, I will fight, but I don't want to do the press tours. I was saying, like, this was before we knew Conor was off the card. I was saying, alright, Dana has two options, and it's either put him on or take him off. But I was thinking maybe Dana won't put him back on because he doesn't want to appear that Conor is, how would I word
it? He's controlling the game.
Yeah, that's Dana doesn't want Dana doesn't want to allow this to happen in case other fighters start to think, well, maybe we could make a demand like this and see it come true.
No, absolutely right.
Yeah. No, well, that was just something I came up with, and seeing it now, all these statements that are being made, they're very dull. You're not really getting a lot of facts about it, that way. So we still don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. But if I'm honest, I do think anyway that the UFC said, look, we can't let appear to favour Conor and let him get away with something like this, because then you will have other fighters asking for pay raises and such.
Yeah, that's exactly, you said you can't read. Well, between the lines, that's exactly what's happening is that, they're taking a loss right now so they don't take a loss down the road.
Yeah.
And, but I think, that's going to happen down the road where fighters are going to be able to say, you know what? I need a little bit more money than that, brother, so, I think that's just, a continuation of the rebellion.
Yeah, I know, and I think it should. I mean, I don't know if you've heard or not, but just last week there was an amateur or maybe semi-professional MMA event over here in Dublin, and a young Portuguese fighter, 28-year-old Portuguese fighter, had died due to brain injury. Now, I'm not sure if you heard about this or not now, but
of course.
Yeah, I'm sure you have. There's footage as well. Have you seen the footage?
I did, yes.
Yeah, now, can I ask you, in your honest opinion, do you think the ref stopped it late? Because he's come out with a statement saying that it was a regular stoppage and that he felt there was nothing wrong with it, and he basically feels he shouldn't be blamed for what happened to the young fighter,
Yeah, and that's the thing. There's so many circumstances that happen whenever you have this type of injury and this type of death. I've been involved, or I've seen three of friends, guys that I've known in the circuit in boxing that have passed away under the same thing, and and you always have to kind of try to put a blame on one person and one person specific, but it takes more than that to really create what had happened there. The bottom line is, the referee's final thing is to protect the fighter and give him any opportunity. But you know what? Let's not forget about the corners. Let's not forget about the cut men. There's been times when I have recommended to these fighters and these corner guys to stop the fight because you're getting the crap beat out of you and you're not going to win the fight, right? So, yeah, I'm not going to bash the referee. I'm not going to bash anybody because there's a lot of bad decisions that have happened in the game where that situation hasn't happened, right? Unfortunately, there's a lot more detailed things that go on behind the scenes that create that kind of damage, so yeah, I'm not going to put a finger on one guy because it's not fair to him because there are just too many telltale signs that have happened. I mean, like say me as a cut man, one of the things I always ask fighters when I work with them is, are you on any kind of medication? Are you taking any inflammatories, any ibuprofens, anything like that? Because aspirin, those things thin out the blood, and if you get a cut or even a brain aneurysm, it's going to be a lot harder to control. So there's a lot of factors that go into that, Leon, and it's not fair really to put the finger on just one person.
No, I'm not necessarily. I'm like that. I made it clear. I'm not blaming the referee, but in my honest opinion, I do feel looking at the footage that it was a bit of a late stoppage. I feel like there was just a couple too many punches landed. Now I made it clear I don't want to blame the referee. I feel it was a late stoppage, but that's again, it's just my opinion, that way. And
well, you look at the fights with Ronda Rousey when she fought Holly Holmes, do you look at it and because she was Ronda Rousey, do you let the fight go on a little longer?
Yeah.
You know, her jaw was broken, in the first round or something like that?
Yeah.
You know, and so, you know, and that's the thing. I'm glad I'm a cut man, brother, because being a referee or being a judge, you're always scrutinized doing the right thing or the wrong things, you know. So, you know, in that way, I'm sure the referee feels terrible. You know, I'm sure the corner feels terrible, you know. Whenever you deal with death in any situation and you have some small part of a factor in that man's life or woman's life, then it's quite effective to you, man.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the reason I actually brought that up, we were discussing fighters' pay, so that's why I actually brought that up, is that when you look at fighters, essentially when a fighter walks into the ring or the octagon or whatever, they are essentially putting their life in their own hands, you know? I mean, you're risking brain trauma in every fight. So to hear that professional fighters are only being paid 5-10 grand for a fight, you know, that way it's ridiculous. I think that it just getting in there, if the option is there to pay them more money, and not even, like, that's what I think my major issue with the UFC was, that it's not like the UFC were paying these fighters, you know, the way it was the sponsors. So what the UFC done was just prevented other people paying the fighters for what they're doing. You know, that's what I found to be the most irritating, you know, just for the fighters. I can only imagine what it's like for someone like you or the fighters who are actually in that situation, you know?
Yeah. No, I agree. And you know, you brought up a valid point on, you know, these guys risking their lives. And, you know, in fact, when I was wrapping Ben Henderson's hands over the weekend, you know, I always come in, when I walk into the dressing room, and if you look at, these guys are modern day gladiators. I don't care how anybody puts, I've worked thousands of these fights, Leon, and I'm at the cage side, ringside, and I'm just in awe on how these guys are taking shots and giving shots, right? But when I'm in the dressing room, I tell these guys, I feel like, let's go back into the old gladiator days in the arenas, and I'm the guy that's putting the armor on you before you go out into the arena and fight for your life and death, right? But Eddie Mustafa Muhammad, which used to be a great light heavyweight champion in boxing here, it's a good friend of mine, and he really said a good quote. He says, the ultimate goal of a fighter is to knock someone unconscious. That's the ultimate goal of a fighter, is to win by knockout. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
You know, so that, you know, unfortunately, when you deal under those circumstances, it's just the nature of the game, man. You're going to have a fallen soldier that goes down, and you know, it's heartbreaking, but that's the nature of this game. This game is designed to hurt people.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that was the point I was trying to make, is that it's only fair that they're compensated as best as possible, you know.
Absolutely, and there should be, you know, some kind of compensation, you know, for the family, because this man gave his life for what he did to the people that put him there. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, and I'm gonna just bring it on a completely different topic now. I don't really like talking about that for too long, you know. It
gets old.
It's sad to hear, you know.
Yeah.
But one thing I was wondering about the cut men, and you know, I've wondered about the referees and the judges, and I've actually come to learn about how you go about becoming a judge in MMA. But as far as cut men, how did you get into the business of being a cut man? And again, another question to add to that is, how did you end up working for the UFC as a cut man? Did you do like a medical course or?
No, I'll start off. In 1974, I'm 64 years old, but in 1974, I was a young lad, and my goal was always to be a professional baseball player, which was big. You know, it's like football is for the Irish. Baseball was the national sport here.
Yeah.
But I grew up very, very poor as a farm worker, so I couldn't go. I walked on to college, but I didn't have a car, so I couldn't practice. But I joined the military, and in 1974, I was stationed in Thailand. So that 1 year I trained. I started off in Taekwondo, and then I transitioned into the Muay Thai system. And when I got out, years down the road, I opened up my own school of kickboxing, and I was a trainer and I was a promoter and all that. And I had to learn how to be a cut man to take care of the fighters, you know. But then at that point, it was only boxing. So I asked this one boxing guy that I was trying to learn to be a cut man and ask if he would help me. And he literally says, F you, I'm taking this to my grave. And if you want to learn, you have to learn just like me. And he walked away. So the old boxing guys, they thought it was a secret to teach what they knew. And once I established what I knew, I teach people. I answer questions and I teach people how to be cutmen. But do you need a medical degree? Brother, I got a high school diploma. And not because I was stupid. It's just because I couldn't afford to continue my education, right?
Yeah.
But I've always had good common sense, and common sense really goes a long ways in doing what we do. And, right before you called, I just answered an email. A young kid in high school wants to be a cut man. And I tell everybody, and I get these questions all the time. I get them from doctors and nurses and paramedics and emergency medical guys. Everybody wants to be a cut man. They see what I do. But I tell them, I say, here's what you have to do. You have to spend hours and days and weeks and months and years in the gym being a fighter and working with the fighters, and you learn your craft and your trade as you go. You just don't walk on and, try to do what I do, because there's no schools out there that will teach you what we do. I had to learn in the trenches. I had to learn on trial and error. And that's why now it's important for me to conduct classes and answer questions and get guys on the right track, especially in the mixed martial arts, because it's such a new sport opposed to boxing. And that's a legacy that if, when I retire, people have asked, what legacy do you want to leave? Well, it's that I help make this game better through education.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the questions I had for you there. You were talking about how MMA is a newer sport than boxing. I was just going to ask, what are the kind of differences when it comes to being cut man for boxing to MMA?
It's so much easier in boxing.
A lot less cuts, yeah.
Yeah. With the MMA for the most part, and like I say, Dana was the first one to bring in professional cutmen. So he started that trend, and now every major organization, even small organization, will bring in cutmen to do what we do, right? And but usually in MMA, we'll work multiple fights, and we'll work, and fighters in MMA get multiple cuts. In boxing, I'll work with one fighter. Let's say it's Klitschko, and Klitschko might get cut. He might not get cut. On this last fight with Tyson Fury, he had 2 cuts, but 2 cuts is I'm very accustomed to working 2 cuts because I do them so often in the mixed martial arts.
Yeah.
So they get cut big time, man, and that's why I love the mixed martial arts better than boxing. hate to say it, it's a cut's a cut, but I love working on them, and I know I can make a difference, and I have made a difference in fighters' careers.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And do you deal in any way with like broken bones, or I'm sure there's a lot of fractured hands, things like that in the UFC. Do you deal with anything like that, any sort of aftercare? Or?
No, that's, what, as a cut man, you need to know your limits, and that goes beyond what I do. My job as a cut man is to wrap your hands, getting ready for battle, and when you're in the fight, is to give you every chance to win the fight by stopping the bleeding or working the swelling. Yeah. Outside of that, I leave that to the doctors, putting stitches on fighters and the x-rays and the broken bones and what have you. Now, that's out of my league, and I'm not medically qualified to actually work on somebody like that.
Yeah.
Though I have fixed broken noses, in
really?
The back, just go in there and snap them back, things like that I have done, but on a general rule of thumb, no, I don't.
So you just said there you don't do stitches. How did you get the name Stitch? Because I always assumed that, like, in the back, maybe if there's a nasty cut, you'd put the stitches in them.
No, when I used to have my own school of kickboxing, it was called ASK, so it was the American School of Kickboxing, and I used to work with, I had kids and adults and women and children, but a majority of them were professional fighters, and I was working with this one fighter, Dave Rooney, and he ended up with a small cut, and knowing what I know now, he had a small cut, and at that point I was learning to be a cut man, and I was starting to get recognized and all that, and looking at the old boxing cut men, they would get little pieces of tape, that same tape that you would wrap your hands with, right? And they would make little butterflies and close up the cuts. So I did that, and Dave Rooney says, well, you save me some stitches, I'm going to call you Stitch. And that's how that name stayed.
Oh, yeah, I never knew that. I always assumed you'd do the stitches as well.
No, brother, I got a high school diploma, man. But you're not the only one. A lot of people think that's what I do, that I'll stitch them up. But that was just that was a name that was given to me by Dave Rooney.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
Dave Rooney, that's an Irish name, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, bingo.
So, being a cut man for the UFC for so long, I'm sure. I mean, you would have been there for all of the biggest fights. So you think back to any UFC fight, it's going to be within the range of 2001 to 2016 or 15, should I say? So, you must have seen some pretty nasty stuff as far as cuts go. Is there anything that sticks out in your mind?
Oh man, there's multiples. I know. The cut with Marvin Eastman when he took a knee from Vitor Belfort was a big dash, and but on a sentimental part, Brock Lesnar when he got knocked out by Cain Velasquez, and he ended up with a big old gash on his right cheek, and I'm working on it, and he's a big solid man, and I'm working on the cut after the fight after he got knocked out, and it's down to the bone, and he's kind of whispering to me, Stitch, take care of me, and I'm thinking, wow, I will. Don't worry, Brock. I'll take care of you. And I knew it was a big cut because I'm pinching in it after I put the medication on. I'm pinching on it to keep it closed. And as soon as I release it, it opens up like a big vagina again. So I knew it was a big cut, right?
Yeah.
And but it was good to see him get stitched up in the dressing room after the fight, and then he goes and he showed me a lot of respect after that. But Anderson Silva, when he broke his leg with Chris Weidman, an hour before I was wrapping his hands, and we're kind of joking around, and he's going to give me some of the team sweats, and he calls me Papi, and we just have a great relationship, and to see that just really kind of bummed me out. But there's I try to stay neutral, but there's always that association that you have with these fighters. Whenever you're in there, you're taking care of them. And, like I told Lyoto Machida when I think he fought Rashad Evans when he won the world title, and his father is Japanese, very, very honorable Japanese. I go in the dressing room after the fights to congratulate him, and his father's sitting there very proud with his kimono on. And I congratulate Lyoto Machida, and he tells me in front of his father, he says, Stitch, in the ring, you are my father. And, that just gave me chills to get that kind of compliment in front of his father, So these are the moments, like that that have been astronomical for me, and they're life sharing, and, you just don't get them because you're there. You get them because people respect you. And, I got tons and tons and tons of stories like that just continue. And that's one of the great things of what has come in my career.
Yeah, no, well, that's really nice to hear. It's so personal.
And then, even Conor McGregor. I know the first time I met him was in Sweden, Stockholm, Sweden, right? I think he was fighting there, and I'm looking at him, and he had just beat the crap out of somebody, and I come back and I said, man, but I've always thought that the Irish of the Mexicans of the other side of the water of Europe, because you guys could fight. Mexicans could fight. I'm Mexican. So there was that association, and John Kavanaugh always brought that up. Oh yeah, we're the Mexicans of Europe. I said, oh, absolutely. You guys are gladiators. You were born to fight. Drink a little bit more than Mexicans, but you guys can fight.
Yeah.
So that's a compliment.
Yeah. Is there any fighters, obviously you deal with all of the fighters essentially in the back room, is there any fighters in particular that really have a really good personality, or that you have a kind of a more personal relationship with than others?
Yeah, there's some. I just saw Vanderlei Silva over the weekend. He was at the Bellator fights, and I've known I met Vanderlei when he was in his prime for Pride, right? Hell, I was scared to make contact with it. I contacted him because he just looked like a human pit bull, right? Yeah. And but him and Shogun, I was doing a seminar for the fighters and the trainers, and Vanderlei and Shogun gave me the nickname Santana for Carlos Santana because they said I look so much like him, right? And but I've always wrapped his hands, and I always had a good relationship with him. Randy Couture, another guy that just very honorable and hospitable, and I had a good relationship. Anderson Silva, like say, always call me Papi, and
Yeah.
so many guys that they'll give Fedor Emelianenko, a big legend. Got a lot of respect for him. When I was working with Josh Barnett in Pride, Fedor had just come back from breaking his hand. This is his first fight back, and when I was in Japan, these guys would always want me to wrap their hands outside of Josh. And Josh Barnett would say, well, you know what? I paid to bring this guy here. If you want Stitch to wrap your hands, you got to pay him $500. So, I'd make $2-3 extra a night, just wrapping hands. And
Really?
well, Fedor was one of the guys that the promoter asked if I would wrap his hands. And, I was so excited, Leon, that I didn't even ask for a fee. But I walked into the dressing room because he was the emperor, right? And all these Russians are there, and I start wrapping Fedor's hands. And my job is I like to talk to the fighters to relax them, joke with them, and just kind of get them out of that nervousness. And Fedor ain't saying shit to me, man. And
Really?
And I said, all right, I understand Russians. I work with the Klitschko's. I understand mentalities. But as soon as I finished wrapping both hands, I asked them how they felt. And if you look at your hand now and you look at the palm of your hand and you open and you close it and you turn it and you look at your knuckles, you open, you close it. He did that, and then he looks at me and says, super. That's the only thing he said,
Really?
And I was just such a happy man. But after the fights, Josh and I are walking back to the bus down the hallway, and he had just won the fight. So he calls us into the dressing room, and we have shots of vodka with Fedor Emelianenko.
No way.
These are some of the many, many great stories that I've had with, the relationship with working with these fighters.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah, incredible is right. Yeah, it blows my mind.
Yeah. So, Stitch, I've heard so much, for a long time I've heard so much about you wrapping fighters' hands. What is it that's so... You just seem to be so much better at wrapping hands than everybody else. What is it... How did you learn to wrap hands, and what do you think is so special about Stitch Duran wrapping your hands?
Well, number one, I practice a shitload, and I practice on myself a lot of times.
Yeah.
I did my work, and there were, what I would do, and that's a good question, and not too many people have really asked me that question, Leon, but I'll answer it this way. As I learned to wrap hands, I would study the old boxing guys, and they really would, a lot of times, would kick you out of the room because at that time, they thought it was a secret. So I would get the basic foundation, and then I would go and I would wrap my own hands and try different techniques, and I would put the gloves on, and I'd get on the bag, and I'd work different, work on the bag for a while, and some of the wraps would be too loose or too tight. So I would make my adjustments to the point where I got the formula that felt comfortable, and it was like a brick and all that. So that is the technique that I use 90% of the time. I could adjust it if a fighter has an injury. Let's say the metacarpals are damaged, or the knuckles are injured, or the thumb is injured, the wrist is sore. I can make adjustments, but I base it off of that foundation that I established there. But also, which is very, very, very important, is the psychological aspect of me going in there, wrapping their hands. Frank Mir once said in an interview, he says, when I see Stitch walking into the dressing room, my stomach just drops because I know it's time to fight. And I understand these guys, right? I mean, I've had guys, I've been wrapping their hands where they start crying.
Really?
Because of the tension, right? So my job is to sit there, relax them, have them forget about that shit, give them a hug at the end of when I wrap their hands, and give them that point of confidence. And that's where that father figure comes in, and that's where that psychology comes in. And even Vitor Belfort says, when I see Stitch come into the dressing room, he brings that calming effect with him, knowing that he's working in the other corner because I'm neutral, right? Yeah. Knowing that he's working, there's many times where I could be wrapping Vitor's hands and let's say Chuck Liddell's hands, and they're fighting each other. I do that many, many times. Well, I wrap both the fighters' hands, but I'm working one of the corners. And so Vitor saying that I bring in that calming effect, knowing that I'm working in the other corner, that I'm there to take care of the fighters. And I think that was a pretty good analogy.
Yeah. No, that's incredible, yeah. Yeah, no, that's unbelievable.
I think I feel, man. I've been doing this, and I'm still in awe of these guys, and I'm just glad I'm old, man, because I couldn't hang with this young generation. You know,
Yeah,
these guys are gladiators, but they're the nicest guys in the world, and
yeah,
that's the thing. I have so much respect for them.
yeah. Now, well, just there's something you said there. You said that you could adjust the way you'd wrap hands based on an injury.
Yes.
Oh, I never knew that. You see, I suffer me pinky finger on my right hand. I broke that years ago, and when I was boxing myself not so long ago before another injury, and when I'd wrap it, the knuckle still doesn't sit right. You know, it doesn't sit where it's supposed to be. If you know
Yeah.
what I mean, it's lower down, and when I wrapped it, it felt a little bit uncomfortable. But I had always just assumed that the way you wrap hands is just, the way you wrap hands around through the knuckles. You know, I never knew there was specific ways. You know that way?
Sure, no, absolutely. You know, there's the bottom line is when you wrap fighters' hands, and there's a big myth that you're putting too much tape, or you're doing this, or you're doing that. Well, the bottom line is when you wrap a fighter's hands, is so that they don't break their hands. If I'm going to knock you out, I'm going to knock you out because I can,
Yeah,
And but injuries like that. Number one, the pinky. Well, number one, you hit wrong anyway. That's why you got that injury.
yeah,
But nonetheless, you have that injury, so you have to address it so that injury doesn't reoccur when you start hitting the bag or the pads or even boxing with somebody. So there are different techniques to work on different injuries. Absolutely.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah.
Alright, Stitch, I've one more question, and I don't, maybe you don't want to answer it, it's fine if you don't, but could I just ask you, when all this came out that you were getting sacked by the UFC, Dana White made it very public that you and him weren't friends. Could you talk about your relationship with Dana? Because from an outside perspective, which obviously is what most people have, is one I have, Dana White seems like a really nice guy. He plays a really nice guy. But the more I seem to hear about Dana, the more I see that he's money orientated. That way. So to hear that you were saying you're friends and you were waiting for a call, and then for Dana to come out and say we were never friends, it seems like a real dick move. I was very surprised to hear that. So
Yeah.
could you comment on that, or?
Yeah. Did you say it was a dick move?
It's a dick move.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, let me explain it to you this way, and then you answer it for me, okay? If you could do that, Leon.
Yeah.
But here's what it is Dana. I knew Dana way before the UFC. We were in the gyms training fighters. Actually, I was training fighters. Dana was he was training some fighters, but not to the extent of the professional level by any means. He was never never worked the corners at the top level or anything like that, but he would train a lot of the executive wives and a lot of the executives, this is the guys from the casinos, so he would make a lot of money. And at that time, I was selling boxing equipment that was made in Mexico, which was the best equipment. And I would sell them to him for his, for the ladies that he would train and what have you not. So I knew Dana in the gyms, training fighters and working in the gyms. And, whenever you work in the gyms with somebody, there's some kind of friendship, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so, we would always, say hi and shoot the shit and all that. And I was working a K1 at the Bellagio one time, a Scott Coker fight, actually. And I hadn't seen Dana in about a year. And he comes up to me and he asked me for my card. And next day he calls and said that they bought the UFC and would I be interested in being a cut man, right? Mm-hmm. And of course I said, yeah. And, and doing that, he changed my whole life, right? But for him, to come out and during that time, he's the one that brought me on board, right? Yeah. So the way I looked at it is he should have been, especially a situation like this, as big as it was, because it was big. Like I said, to do 57 interviews in 2 weeks with, interviews all over the world and have camera crews coming to my house, that was big news, right? And at that point, being that he's the one that brought me in, shouldn't he have been man enough to take me out? So that's what had happened there. So, for him to come, and I think of all the stupid statements he's probably made through his whole career, that's probably the one that sits on top that I probably wish he could he probably wishes he could regret, because he just got slammed by the media and by the fans and everybody. Yeah. And there's friendships, there's different levels of friendship, right? And did Dana and I ever have lunch together? Nah, we never did. Did we break sweat in the same gyms? Absolutely we did.
Yeah.
You know, did we shoot the shit with each other before the UFC? Absolutely we did. You know, did we, you know, say hi to every time we saw each other? And absolutely we did. You know, so there's different forms of friendship, but him to have brought me in, I thought it would have been manly enough for him to bring me out. And, you know, when they called me to release me, like say the quote is because of the interview you did about Reebok, the UFC's not going to use you no more. So the guy that called me, we're all friends, right? But he's a good friend of mine, and his voice is cracking, and he told me that, and I didn't want to blast him. I could have blasted him, but that would have been very disrespectful to him. But I said, you know what? At the end of the day, can you do me a favor? Could you tell Dana I said that he ain't got no balls, that he should have called me personally? You know?
Yeah.
So let me ask you, in what you just heard, was that statement wrong, or what do you think?
Oh no, that's. Look, honestly, I knew it was bullshit. You know that way. I mean,
Yeah.
I obviously I didn't know what you had just told me, but I think as a general sign of respect to someone like if you know someone so long, which clearly you know each other so long, you know, there's a general courtesy that should go with something like that. I mean, as you said, he brought you in. The least he could do was pull you aside and say it himself. You know that way. So
Yeah.
I absolutely agree in that he has no balls in that
Yeah.
sense. You know that way. Look, I definitely do agree. That's bullshit. You know that way.
Yeah, that was, and then I'm glad I said. Listen, he fired his own father. He showed
What?
You know, yeah, his father used to sit at. If you read my book, From the Fields to the Garden, you know, the life of Stitch Duran, the first paragraph has I talk about Dana's father. He used to sit right next to me, and we would talk, you know, shoot the shit and talk about fights and all that. And next thing I know, he's not working with Dana. Fired his own father.
Wow. And why?
Well, that's what you're going to have to ask Dana. You know, I don't know. You know, but he had a 0-0 relationship with his father. You know, I know I had asked him one time in Brazil. The last time I spoke to him, you know, because Dana was at the higher level, so I understood. You know,
Yeah.
we were down here and all that, but we were at the reality show, tough reality show, the first one, and we're in the back of the curtains before we come out, and we got like 5 minutes. And I asked him because his dad was good friends. I mean, we shot the shit all the time. And hey, man, how's your dad? Oh, fuck, I don't know. I don't see this guy no more, and just real disrespectful, man. And I think, wow, you know, that's. And I said, you know, I lost my father, and you know, I saw him, and you know, my father was an alcoholic, and I was driving home, you know, to my hometown, and he was there drinking with his friends, and I didn't stop to say goodbye, and you know, next thing I know, he passes away, and that was my biggest regret. I told him, I don't give a shit, you know, and that was my biggest regret, that you know, I didn't get, you know, my father was there drinking with his buddies, and I knew he was an alcoholic, and I didn't want to see him that way, so I just kept driving, and next thing I know, he passed away, and you know, but you know, that's what I said, you know, you ought to make some kind of amends with your father. And
Yeah.
that was the case, you know. So, yeah. So for him to get rid of me like that, then I'm sure it didn't bother him at all.
Seems to be a bit of a recurring pattern, doesn't it, to just drop people, you know that way? I mean, he may say what he will about the situation with the 2 years, but I think the fact that you have such a history and going back so long,
Yeah.
there's a certain amount of respect that's demanded just on how far you go back. So that seems to be a bit of a recurring pattern there, you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. You know, and I always tell my kids and anybody in life, you know, and you know, I mean, I could tell you and you could break it down, but when you're right, you know you're right.
Yeah.
And when you're wrong, you know you're wrong. You might bluff somebody, but you know if you fucked up, you know you fucked up, right?
Yeah.
And if, you know, and if you're right, you know you're right. Well, that's the way I look at life. I'm pretty logical. If I make a mistake, I'm going to admit my mistakes, but if I'm right, I'm going to stick to my guns.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah. I don't know if you heard now, and you said that you're sure Dana regrets making the statement that you two were never friends. Have you read the statement now Dana's made that him and Connor were never friends?
No, I haven't seen that.
Yeah, I only saw it today myself. Now, I didn't actually read the article, but I just read Dana White, quotation marks, me and Connor were never friends, we were always associates.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, now obviously there's pictures of Dana White and Connor on jets. You know that way, having lunch and having dinner, you know that way. But supposedly now, because all the shit has hit the fan, oh no, they're only associates.
Didn't Dana let Connor drive his Ferrari down Las Vegas Boulevard?
Yeah. That you know, I mean, like it's ridiculous. You know,
Yeah.
it's like even all the fighters are complaining that Dana is so far up Connor's ass. You know that way, and
Yeah.
I mean he's brought in so much money. I'm sure he's probably saying how can he not be so far up his ass? But even still, to come out now that shit has hit the fan and say no, we're not friends, we're just associates.
Wow.
It's cheap, you know.
Yeah, I'm gonna go check it out once we get off here. But you know, when you sell your soul for money, and especially when there's so much of it, you know,
Yeah.
and you sell yourself and you put yourself in that position, it's not a happy life, brother.
Yeah.
You know, I'm happy being that I'm a truthful man, and I'm happy that I work for the money that I have, and I'm happy that I have my family that I take care of, and you know, those are all the things at the end of the day, man, that are going to make a real man out of you.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. That's one of the questions I was actually just going to ask at the start, but never actually got around to, was what are you up to nowadays? You said you were at Bellator and...
Yeah, there's a lot of great things have been happening. Obviously, I just signed a 3-year deal with Bellator. But
good, yeah.
Thursday I'm heading off to Atlantic City. I'm working with Andre Duran. He's boxing Friday, and then Saturday morning I fly straight back cross country to California. I'm working with Andre Berto. He's boxing Victor Ortiz, and then the week after I'm working with Amir Khan. He's fighting Canelo for a big fight, pay-per-view fight here in Las Vegas. So then, you know, I was in the latest Creed movie. That just,
I saw that,
yeah.
I actually saw that, and I wasn't sure if it was you or not.
That was me. Yeah, that was me, and they're talking about a second one. And so, I mean, things have been... I haven't skipped a beat, brother. You know,
good to hear, yeah.
You know, from the time the UFC let me go till now, I've been doing a lot of appearances. You know, I've been to Austria. I've done shows. I've done independent shows everywhere, and just guest appearances, and you know, a lot of interviews. And so, you know, I became kind of the role model or spokesperson for doing the things the right way. And now to see, you know, a big gun like Conor McGregor really kind of wearing the same kind of shoes that I am, that's a good feeling. I know I did something right.
Yeah. Oh no, absolutely, yeah. And it's really good to hear as well that when you lost your job with the UFC, because I'm sure a lot of people thought, because obviously the UFC has so many fans, I'm sure a lot of people thought that when the UFC sacked you, you just fell off the earth, you know, that way, because, I mean, obviously to most people the UFC is the top of the top and there's no beating it, so I'm sure for a lot of people it's going to be good to hear that, yes, although you got sacked, you managed to get on with it, and I don't know.
Oh yeah, and you know, throughout even that period when I was working with the UFC, there was a lot of opportunities that I was missing that I was passing up on because I was already committed to the UFC. And like say, boxing pays me a lot more than I get in one fight. And, you know, working with the Klitschko's and Amir Khan and Andre Ward and whoever, these big pro boxing shows. And I gave up fights with Vladimir Klitschko and with Andre Ward and Andre Berto, and because I was already committed to do shows for the UFC, which paid a lot less, but nonetheless, I was a team player. So when I left the UFC, these offers that continued coming to me, I started taking them. And it was nice to go and work with other organizations, even though they were smaller, just to give them some of my feedback and educate them as I went. So I've been blessed, man, that, you know, the fans have been there and the fighters have been there, and, you know, all the trainers and even the promoters have all been there and understand that, you know, I kind of took a bullet for everybody.
Yeah. Oh no, well, that's really good to hear. Yeah. I'm finishing up now. Just have a couple more quick questions. If that's alright. You don't need to run around, eh?
No, what's up?
No. I've run here about an hour now. Just making sure you don't need to head off somewhere or anything.
Man, that's about, you know, guys would say, Stitch, man, we could do 15, 20 minutes. Well, 15, 20 minutes is never enough, man. I could talk for fucking hours. You know, the thing about it, my job don't start till when I fly to California or to Atlantic City. So, no, that's fine. If you got a couple of questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Oh, great stuff. Yeah, that's, to be honest, I was actually planning on talking to you for about a half an hour. I says, you know, I'm sure he's a busy bloke. I don't want to keep him, you know, that way. So, just it's good to hear that I'm not getting in the way of your life too much.
No, I would let you know, brother, if I had to go somewhere.
Alright, great stuff. So, you just said there you're going to be fighting with Amir Khan in a couple of weeks?
Yes.
Obviously,
Next week, actually.
next week. Oh, it's next week.
Or on the May 7th.
Oh, May 7th.
10 days, yeah.
So, what would go in? Like, what's your day gonna be like? Like, obviously, it's such a big fight, you know that way. I'm a big fan of Amir Khan. Obviously, he's from the UK, which is just next door to Ireland.
Right.
So, what's your day gonna consist of? Say when you show up to the stadium for that Amir Khan fight.
It's just like all the other dates. You know, I do so many fights that there's a system that I have, and whether it's the Bellator fight or whether it's a small fight or whether it's a big fight, you know. But what I'll do is the night before, I make sure I go through all my inventory, so I make sure I have enough gauze. Let's say for Amir Khan, so I have enough gauze and tape to wrap 5 fighters. So if I wrap Amir Khan and he's not happy with that wrap, well then I have enough gauze and tape to wrap them right. I check, make sure I have the medications. Even though I know I do, but I always check and double check and make sure I have the medications, my ice packs, my KO swells, the N swells, the irons that I use for the swelling. Make sure I have all that, and then I make sure I iron all my clothes. Nothing bugs me more than to see somebody work in the corner with a wrinkled uniform. So, you know, and then I will sit down. I will sit, you know, privately by myself for anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour and just kind of meditate, you know, just kind of go over my situation and just relax and all that, and then shoot off to the arena. And once I shoot off to the arena, then it's all business, you know. And you know, once again, like Amir Khan, you know, I bring that point of security for him, you know, knowing that I'm going to take care of him. So it's a ritual that I do, and you know, I've been very successful with it, so I continue to do it.
All right. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, and obviously you're doing this kind of a thing so long now. You've been to probably all major fight events. Is there any that you prefer? I mean, you said that you've done Cutman for UFC and big boxing events and Bellator. And is there any that you prefer, as in big boxing fights or big UFC fights? Or
man, I've done them all, brother. You know, so yeah. You know, I enjoy them all. You know, and not so much, you know, the TV or the glamour or anything like that, but just the relationship that I have with these fighters. But one thing that I do enjoy, or there's always a different twist to the ambiance, is when I go to Japan for, let's say, Rising, which used to be Pride, right? To go to Japan for fights, it's a whole different scenario because, you know, that's really kind of where the combat sports started from, you know, and just to go back over there under that culture, to me is always exciting.
Yeah. And I'm sure it is. Japan, I mean, you can even see, like, when the UFC goes to Japan, just from the telly, you can see how into it the fans are. You know, the way it looks like an incredible experience.
Yeah, it's a different world, no doubt.
Yeah. Well, I think I've asked you everything that I wanted to ask you, and yeah, I think I'm just about ready to wrap up now.
All right, good.
All right, cool.
All right, Leon. Well,
all right, thanks very much.
The call, man, and you know, call anytime, brother, because you know, this is something that I enjoy doing, and for me, it's relaxing. You know, just sit there and talk, and I guess on the psychological aspect, I guess you're probably better than the shrink anyway, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I like about these, you know, is that they're informal. You know, it's kind of just, there's no, you need to watch your language, you're on telly, you know, it's just,
yeah,
you know, it's just sitting and have a conversation, because essentially that's what we're doing. If I was sat in front of you right now, I'd be sitting down in a chair just talking asking you the same questions, you know?
Yeah, and that's what I call it barbershop talk. You know, you go up to the barber and you just sitting there waiting for your turn to get your hair cut, and you know, you just talking stuff, you know, and that's what I enjoy doing.
All right, so I cut the podcast off there. The rest was kind of just, you know, thanks for coming on, things like that. So yeah, I found this to be a really really interesting, really informative podcast. Yeah, as I said, he was a really nice guy. You know, he didn't dodge any questions. He was really open about everything that happened. Told some really good stories as well. Yeah, I found it very interesting. Hopefully you did too. And yeah, thanks for listening. As I said at the start, please don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Yeah, okay, thanks for listening, guys.